I often remind myself on Palm Sunday of perhaps the best remembered Palm Sunday for me, which was in Jerusalem itself. I was there on Palm Sunday morning, and thousands of people all marched and walked down the Kidron Valley into the city behind a donkey. And these were people of every nationality. When I was talking to Tom about the Commonwealth Games, I thought it's a bit like that, really. They were for everywhere, all across the world, all the languages, singing and reminding each other of the importance. Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. So that's in my mind when I think of Palm Sunday. But let me read to you Matthew's account of the first of those Palm Sundays. Find it in Matthew 21, and I'm reading verses 1 through to 11. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. "Say to daughter Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." The disciples went and did as Jesus had instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him, those that followed, shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest!" When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, "Who is this?" The crowds answered, "This is Jesus the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee." What a marvelous story. A number of things that are important in that particular account. Firstly, there's the place of the donkey and the colt. Well, that's really important in this because a donkey is, of course, a symbol not of power, but of humility. And I think that really is something that is important to recognize. Humility at that time in history was not considered a powerful thing. It wasn't considered something that you'd want to be. We often say, oh, he or she is humble, and we're making a compliment of it. Not necessarily true in those days, but humility has been graced by Christ and been made the greatest of all things. Then there's the reaction of the crowd. Now, the crowd is not the crowd following Jesus. This is the crowd that meets him as he reaches the city. I think the procession was probably quite small. The disciples and a few close people who were hanging around with those disciples. But when he came into the city, tells us in one version, the whole city was stirred. There was a reaction of the crowd to Jesus. Perhaps some of them had been there. That's why the recognition of the crowds is so important. Perhaps some of them had seen him healing people. Perhaps some of them had seen him touching the marginalised and the poor and the sick and reaching out to people in need. And just as we talked about a city on the Gold Coast being such a vibrant place, it was once so small, but now it's such a large place, teeming with people. And, you know, when Jesus came into the city, I think he made sense for all of us of the fact that we ought to be concerned about the crowds and the masses and the people, and perhaps especially for the unnoticed and those people unrecognised. And before the launch into all the activities of this coming Holy Week, it's good to realise that it was Jesus that led these disciples into the thick of it. It wasn't a case of Jesus came into Jerusalem and then all sorts of things happen which lead to the cross. As though it's some kind of accident. He faces evil straight on. He marches into the darkness and he faces the cross. And that experience of the loneliness and isolation of the cross will be ultimately transformed by the light and power of resurrection. So we've got a great week ahead of us. I hope you have too. And I hope as you go through this week, you'll recognise day by day that the journey Jesus made was not merely a journey for himself, for those disciples, for those who believed at the very beginning, but it was a journey he made for each one of us, a journey that would ultimately bear the truth of sacrifice and hope and love. Jesus will enter the city. He will face the enemy. He will face the evil. and he will proclaim love. Love that is demonstrated supremely in the mark of the cross. So together, as we journey into that city, it's hard to imagine. I've been minister of churches at different times in my life, and I've once said to a group of people on Palm Sunday, you know, next week we'll be here celebrating Easter Day, but it's what happens in between that makes all the difference, the suffering of Christ on his cross. May God grant us a real understanding of what this Holy Week is all about.